When I first booted up Infinite Falls Night in the Woods, I was expecting to walk around for a bit, maybe talk to some characters, and then move on with my week. But the minute I stepped off that bus, the writing powering this game struck me to my core. Night in the Woods is about a lot of things at once. It's about a girl named May returning to her hometown after dropping out of college. It's about dealing with change and the decay of small towns in America. It's about despair and helplessness while also yearning for a better life and strengthening interpersonal relationships. This is, bar none, one of the most compelling experiences I've ever had with a video game protagonist. In my mind, there is often a conceptual disconnect between the player and the character that they're controlling. When I'm playing, say, the medic in Team Fortress 2, I think of myself and the other digital avatars I interact with to be players first and foremost, who are expressing themselves through an avatar. Now, role-playing games give players an opportunity to more closely connect themselves with their virtual character. So you are your character, and in many ways your character is a reflection of you. You can make choices in the game that are emblematic of your own values and reasoning. But this game is different than even that. When I'm playing Night in the Woods, I am May Borowski. I am living through her world, her senses, her feelings, and her relationships. Co-creator Scott Benson is very intentional about May's writing. We weren't interested in empowering the player to roleplay. Alec and I decided from the start that it was May's story, and that she was her own person and not a shell for the player. This isn't a game about making the May you want, it's about exploring the May that is and the world that she lives in. Of special note, and the topic of this video, is how Night in the Woods explores May's relationship with spirituality and religion. I argue here that one of the biggest lessons the game imparts onto May, and by extension us, is that each person's conception of religion and spirituality is nuanced and colored by their own lived experiences. Suspending judgment of others' experiences enables a better understanding of the role of religion in their lives. Religious scholars use many different lenses to try and understand religions as they are practiced. One such lens is through lived religion, which seeks to understand religion as it is practiced by ordinary people in everyday life. Robert Orsi, a prominent scholar within the field of lived religion, describes its function as so. With the reintroduction of experience comes renewed interest in the agency of the subject of experience, with issues of freedom, action, and limitations in the multiple sources of experience, such as the imagination, memory, family context, emotions, and the unconscious, which are never simply identical to the world as it is given, and how these contribute to the making of the really real, and in the relational grounds of experience, including dimensions of intersubjectivity other than the verbal or the conscious. Understanding this notion of lived religion is going to be important for us to understand May and the other characters she runs into on her journey. The town of Possum Springs is in rough shape. You quickly learn that since leaving your small American town, unemployment has been up, morale is down, and many residents are feeling desolate. And Casey is missing. That'll probably be important later. Oh, and May's been having dreams, like weird dreams. In one of these dreams, May encounters the Sky Cat, a mysterious and nihilistic being. May asks explicitly if it is God, to which the cat replies that it is not a god, nor does this god exist. May then attempts to explain faith to Skycat, who dismisses it as inconsequential to a larger universe. Given that May is a nihilistic cat, and the Skycat is, well, also a nihilistic cat, I interpreted this conversation as a dialogue within the depths of May's mind. Some important context is that May grew up religious but abandoned religion in her teenage years. Once she returns home, she's reminded of the presence of faith in her life, especially after talking to her religious mother and Pastor Karen. So why is May trying to reason with this cat about what God and faith are? This is a moment where May is reflecting on her experiences with religion and recognizing the impact that shutting it out has had on her world perspective. This interaction is a manifestation of what Orsi would consider an unconscious religious experience. Though she is no longer outwardly religious, she was raised on faith, and thus it is still embedded deep in the fabric of her life. She understands why faith matters and is attempting to explain that to a cat who is a reflection of her present outward self. The next day, May goes to church to discuss this dream with Pastor Karen. May mentions being lonely and that she doesn't really believe in God anymore. And to her surprise, Karen shares her doubts about God existing and describes faith as an ongoing process that needs to be actively maintained. May is appalled that Karen would preach about God on Sundays, yet have some doubts about its existence. She tries to get a rational explanation from Karen, but is ultimately unsuccessful. I think a lot of players likely had similar feelings to May upon discovering this information. What do you mean a pastor doubts God? How can that be? But what the game is communicating here is that even for figures within organized religion, faith can still be weird and uncomfortable. Most people, and perhaps many scholars, see clergy members as having an infallible devotion to their God. But they're human too, and thus their relationship with faith is not only formed by their work, but also other experiences in their lives. Religious leaders in the real world have to deal with situations that affect their faith and the way they practice it. These are some quotes from women who are local religious leaders speaking on their relationships with faith after losing a child. Moreover, there was an understanding that everyone interprets and practices their religion differently, and that religion is not always black and white, cast in stone. Everyone's faith goes up and down, so when the tragedy does happen to you, it depends what emotional state you're at. A lot of things come into it. Sometimes instead of religion coming into it, it's more your personal feelings. Night in the Woods is attempting to humanize religious leaders and create empathy for them through Pastor Karen. It's saying, look, see, none of us really know what's going on. It's encouraging you to break your conceptions of what faith looks like. May's confrontation with religious experience extends to her friends, too. One night she goes ghost hunting with Angus, a bear who's dating May's best friend. The two take a break to watch the stars, and Angus opens up about his abusive childhood, at some points being locked in a pantry for days by his mother. It's a deeply chilling bit of information for a character who's really not that close to May. Angus explains that he tried to pray to God to be saved from his abusers, but these efforts proved futile. The lack of response made him feel isolated and resulted in him eschewing away any faith. May initially has difficulty understanding this. She reasons that turmoil would make someone more likely to believe in God. But Angus insists that he found salvation from having something he could prove rather than place blind faith in. This conversation is a great example of how the phenomenology of religion includes experiences that push someone away from faith. A lot of religious scholarship covers why people are faithful, but I speculate there is some survivorship bias here that neglects explorations into why someone rejects faith. Though I am but an amateur religious scholar, I have a feeling that the answer to why faith may be rejected is far more nuanced than any overarching theory could explain. Night in the Woods offers just one person's story, but its impact allows players to be more understanding of others who share those same feelings. Actually, about that ghost hunting they were doing, they found something alright, but it was definitely not a ghost. It was way worse. While not a horror game, Night in the Woods has a good blend of surreal and spooky to keep players on edge. As the player continues to explore the town, they have frequent run-ins with hooded figures. This creates a lot of mental anguish for May, who is already having kind of a rough time. Despite its simple visuals, this game does a fantastic job of using light and audio to build tension. May and her friends eventually make their way to an abandoned mine, where they believe these hooded figures to be hiding. They stumble upon a cult who worships a chthonic deity named the Black Goat. The cult sacrifices people who, quote, wouldn't be missed, and in return the Black Goat provides prosperity to the town. This is also where the gang learns that this is where their friend Casey, who I mentioned earlier, got sacrificed. But these people didn't wake up one day and decide to start a cult. They were mine workers, and they saw the downturn of the town coming as mines closed and people started to move away. They went to the church and prayed, but they said they felt unheard by God. But when one of these miners heard the black goat sing to them, they embraced it. But curiously, some things about this story aren't adding up. The black goat allegedly promised prosperity, but a look at the current state of the town shows that it is anything but. Additionally, none of the miners have ever spoken to the black goat. None of them know what it does to make Possum Springs, quote, prosperous. And their need to constantly sacrifice means that they are not satisfied with what the goat has done for them thus far. What keeps this cult going, in essence, is their faith and their desire to protect the world they know. It is very easy and pretty reasonable to pass harsh judgment and criticism onto this cult. But if we suspend that judgment for a moment and understand how we got to this point, we can recognize the power of faith in the lives of everyday people. Even when there is no empirical evidence of miracles or salvation from this black goat, these people continue to maintain their faith. These cult members have convinced themselves that their sacrifices are done for a just cause. Even more interesting is that May actually believes the black goat exists and that she has heard it. We now come full circle, where May has had so many of these spiritual experiences that she has a moment of lucidity even in a high-tension situation like this. She has put aside the denial and preconceptions of faith that she has had this whole time and finally understands that she too knows the goat. Let's wrap things up. So far, we have pointed to a number of instances where May enters a situation with a religious preconception, and upon learning the other person's perspective, she processes and then shifts her mindset. This mental shift causes the cult meeting, which would otherwise be a terrifying and enraging interaction, to actually be one of clarity and even some closure. Of course, May and friends are still appalled by the actions of this cult and are now even more confused and nervous than ever. But from a religious perspective, we have seen May reach a sort of internal enlightenment. The game reinforces this with a brief cutscene later where May is finally able to communicate with the black goat, though it speaks in indecipherable glyphs. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Night in the Woods tries to tackle a lot of topics at once, but one of the lasting lessons for the player is to understand others' religious experiences as their own, and be willing to suspend a fundamentalist judgment on them. The game is simultaneously communicating that not all spiritual experiences are quite meant to be understood. Religion is deeply personal and thus complicated, and as scholars we have to accept that some things we may simply never comprehend.